This video is brought to you by Flower Magazine.
Okay, Emily. First of
Margot.
all, hello. Thank you for taking the time to be with me to talk about this incredible project that you undertook and completed beautifully, I might add. The first thing I would like for you to do is pronounce your last name.
That's an excellent request. It is Eerdmans, like bird. Yes.
Okay. Erd like bird. That's how I'm going to remember it. Um,
Okay.
because I'm very visual and I also do love birds. So, um, I guess what I would like to hear first and foremost is how did you get into Mario Buatta's world? How in your life, not just in this book or your previous book, but just in life, how did you get into his world?
The astonishing thing about Mario is that he really was a household name. And I have sisters-in-law who aren't, they don't buy shelter magazines. They're not into it, but they knew who he was. And his name really carried. I did not know who he was growing up.
Right.
When I came to New York, I had just finished graduate school at Sotheby's Institute in London, where I developed a love of English furniture and really falling in love with the whole Colfax and Fowler, English country house style. Just passionately loved that. I was working for an antiques gallery who always exhibited at the Winter Antique Show, now known as the Winter Show. And
Right.
that's where I first encountered Mario. And there was this, sort of odd gentleman with a dollar bill on a string that he's, oh, sorry, my cat.
No, don't ever apologize about a cat.
Okay.
Mine
So,
might jump up here any minute.
okay. So
Mary Gold, come here.
he's like 18 years old. Okay, Fred.
Oh,
Um, um, So yeah, so it was like, who is this man, pulling these pranks, and like Martha Stewart's trying to pick up the dollar bill, um and and that's when I was introduced to Mario for the very first time. And of course, he had been chairman of the show. He wasn't anymore when I was there in the early 2000s. But that, oh my God. Okay, so this this is how we're rolling, Margot. I have a
okay.
I
All
have
right.
a cat scarf.
Okay.
So I wrote my very first book for this gallery, Hyde Park Antiques, and Mario wrote the introduction. And the he came in one day, and I was so respectful of him, and I was like, Mr. Buatta. And he just, I don't even think he remembers meeting me. I think he has no recollection of that. And you know, he he didn't want to be revered. He didn't want to be, oh, Mr. Buatta. He wanted to joke, and he wanted, if you know what I mean, like he wanted to just have he didn't need to be worshipped. He wanted to just have a fun conversation with
Right.
people. And so later on, everybody had wanted Mario to do a book forever, decades. And Charles Myers at Rizzoli wore him down, won the campaign, and suggested me, among I think a few other writers, to do the book. And that's when Mario remembers meeting me. So in terms of, so like, I didn't grow up knowing who Mario was, but
Mhm.
once I came to New York in the early 2000s, like, then you were aware of, like, oh, this is a living legend, this
Yeah.
is a master. And I had only written books about dead decorators, Madeleine Castaing, and then I mean, she was the one. And then there were more history books, so it never interested me to write, to help somebody with their book. But he was an exception, and I really, really wanted the job. And I thought it would be such an honor to help him tell his story. And here was somebody who really deserved a book that, and not just that he deserved it, we wanted, like the audience, we craved the book.
We demanded it.
We demanded it. And the fact that I didn't really even know so much about his work. I knew like some of the major rooms, like that blue and white bedroom and some of those other Kip Space showroom rooms that are so great. Oh, this is the other cat. But it was our shared love of the English country house style that really made me excited to work with him. And I remember this editor at AD who actually knew Mario forever. He was sort of a family friend of her family's, said to me like, oh, this is like the most important book you've ever done. And talking about the first book we did together. Right. And I was like, well, I don't know about that, but who knew how life-changing it would be to have Mario come into my life? Mario, I can't even to anticipate that, I didn't know if our friendship was like a showmance and he just wanted to get a good result, like we still be friends after that book was over. And then fast forward and I'm like in the room as he's dying, and be helping take care of his health, doctor coordination and think like, who knew? And then that next step of after he was gone I'm so grateful to Mario's brother to be able to help sell everything he had left over, which meant so much to him, but to celebrate him and to celebrate his legacy. So who knew that was going to happen?
Well, gosh, yes, the turns and twists of, once you make that first decision, where that takes you.
Right?
The
yes.
Adventure, the aesthetic, the emotional, the life adventure that you have had with Mr. Buatta, with the Prince of Chintz. What a blessing. I think about, reading, I think about your sort of being the keeper of really, I won't use the word brand because that's too clinical, but really the keeper of the aesthetic, the keeper of his things, his treasures, and not just physical, because you did get to know him so well and for so long. So one of the things that appealed to me about this second book, among so many, is the personal nature, the more bio-ness of it. And can you talk a little bit about his background, where he came from, how he got into what he got into, what drove that passion, and that for starters.
So that is one of the big differences between the two books. The first book is as if you're spending an afternoon with him and you get his full-on stand-up routine. And then you get this incredible portfolio of his work. Yeah. And we're really mindful that the second book couldn't be that. But it was also the book that if I hadn't collaborated with him and if I had had more free range, I would have written, because I was really curious about how did this kid from, an immigrant family growing up in Staten Island, only had a little bit of college education, didn't have family money to back him, become what, if not the biggest name in interior design in America for a period of time, one of them, and going to all these Fifth Avenue and Park Avenue parties and, Turnbull and Asser and, just like
turned out.
Like, how did that happen? And that was a story Mario did not want to talk about. He didn't lie about it or anything like that. He wasn't a creation. He was not pretentious, and he was would never hide the fact that he came from Staten Island. But he wanted it to look effortless. And part of he was an entertainer, as you know. I mean, you knew him. Like, he wanted to make people smile. And so he didn't want you to see all the hard work that was behind it. But yet there was a lot of hard work that was behind it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I wanted to reveal. So so the fact that, talking to his cousins and his brother, he was sort of a misfit, in that he was always decked out. They talk about him wearing these like Bermuda shorts and knee socks, and nobody else was wearing that kind of thing. And he
outrageous.
It was outrageous. And he was always Mario. Like, he always loved to dress. He always was interested in style. I mean, I love that. I don't think all the details made it into the book, but like, he's going off to Staten Island antique dealers, and he's like maybe 15 years old, and he's befriending women in their mid-20s who are doing the same thing. And it's like, I mean, I just love it. So it was something innate in him, this sort of passion. And another thing that I really began to understand when I was thinking about where Mario came from was he loved antiques. Like, he collected, like, over collected, you could safely say. And he always told the story, like, over and over again, about he was 10 or 11 or 12. It changes. He bought this little lap desk, and he bought it on time, so on layaway. And then finally, when he brings it home, his father is like, why would you want to buy something so old? You have to keep it in the garage to make sure any worms or termites come out of it. And I thought that's such a contrast between his father, who was born in America, but he was one of the first siblings to be born in America.
Right.
You want something new. Like, you don't want hand-me-downs. You want to be able to afford something new. Where So Mario almost seemed like an alien, I think, to his mother and father, of loving old, worn things. And that was really interesting to me. And collecting, I mean, especially after he died, I had been in his apartment before he died, but so I knew what I was getting myself into, but it was too much. I mean, it was almost, it was just walls and walls and walls of stuff and mountains. But he had such an emotional bond with the stuff, that it wasn't like he couldn't have parted with it. He emotionally couldn't have let go of that stuff during his life. And so that, I don't know, I think it's just interesting to think about the role things, material, in a way, like, it was so emotional when we disassembled his living room with the dog paintings, because in a way his things were him. It was so bonded with his identity that it became really emotional. Like, the more the apartment thinned out and the less there was of him, it was sort of like saying goodbye to him again. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. I mean, there's a difference, and we jokingly say there's a fine line between collecting and hoarding, but when you collect and I mean, I look around my house and everything here has a memory, so I can't help but imagine that was the case with him. I think about too, Emily, the contrast between, he once told me about his house growing up. Was it modern?
Yes, that's right. Like, very deco, all white.
But he had an aunt who was very swishy and wore furs and had Chippendale furniture and things like that. Then he was much more drawn to her. Am I remembering that?
That's absolutely right. It was his mother's sister, and both sisters had a house built for them by their father, and they lived a block apart. And there are these adorable little houses. And so Mario's mother decorated it deco, and then Aunt Mary had it just like so over the top. And I actually got to visit the house.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, it was. And I was like, I'm so curious to see if this lives up to his descriptions of it. And it did. And she had
Yeah.
actually, I mean, she had had a later period where she did this like Chinese modern thing with this like crazy biomorphic settee and like metallic geometric wallpaper. I mean,
Mhm.
she really, and then the basement was like this Hollywood stage set of like an Alpine bar, and then curtains on a window that went to nowhere. And it was, she really must have been something. She really, and so yes, I think she took him to New York shopping to all the department stores, Sloan's and B.
Yeah.
Altman, and I think showed him another world that he wouldn't have seen necessarily without Aunt Mary. Yeah. We all have an Aunt Mary, don't we, in our life?
Hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Hopefully if we're lucky. Yeah.
She clearly was so instrumental in his developing taste, and but also you think he responded to that. He
Yes.
did not respond to the more minimal, more clean, he was born to chintz, you
He
know.
was. He was. Oh, that should have been the title. Oh my God, Margaret
No,
was born to
no,
chin.
but I mean, I'm so curious always about people's backgrounds and what informed their taste and their style and their development, their design development. And so Aunt Mary, I'm so glad that you knew about her. I did not remember her name. I will tell you, and this is not, you're not interviewing me, but I met Mario in New Orleans years ago at a cocktail party, and he was talking to somebody on a sofa, and I looked over at one point and he was sitting by himself, and I beelined it over there and sat down and introduced myself and just asked him about himself, and I asked him about those things,
Mm,
and he was happy to share
yeah.
because that I mean, okay, what's your latest project? Yes, that's interesting, but I want to go deeper. And so you got deeper, and that's what interests me.
And what was also interesting to understand was how his trajectory towards starting out in design, which really began by working on the furniture floor of B. Altman, to, becoming the Prince of Chins. And he kept these scrapbooks starting in the late 60s. And so anytime he was mentioned or any show house went into these scrapbooks. And so it was, and I think he had over 100 of them. And so just to go through them, I felt like I went on the journey with him.
Yeah.
And there's a huge part of why he was able to go out on his own was because there was somebody, a friend of his, George Schreier, who was a man about town and a decorator, had gone to Princeton. He worked at Keith Irvin and then got Keith to hire Mario. George committed suicide, and George's mother asked Mario to take over the jobs that were not finished. And many of them were sort of in the New Jersey area. And so looking through those publications, he was doing, if somebody wanted chrome and glass, he would do whatever. I mean, he had to, like,
Yeah.
he was like, hire me, I'll do whatever you want. And so that was so interesting to see how there's this gradual shift from him doing that and like, yes, I could do whatever they want. I personally like this, but to being like, this is what I do. I do, if you want the English country house look, then I'm your person. And as he became more focused and just embraced it and didn't try to be all things to all people,
Right.
his trajectory towards success just like skyrocketed. I think that's such an interesting, it was an interesting lesson and to me, and also just that he didn't know immediately it was going to be chintz. He had to explore and go around the block a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I love that because, that is sort of the ultimate challenge for a designer is, I know what I know, and I know what's good, and I know what works, but I also have this client. And, so they're just only the greats can say,
Yeah.
impose this is my look. If you
Yeah.
want this, come to me. If you want something else, go over there. And I see that all the time. I see it in garden design. I see it in floral design. I see it in interior design. It's just that, that tension between I am confident in what I do, and it works and it's good and it's beautiful. If you do want that chrome or something, a barca lounger, you need to call somebody else.
Yeah, having the
But there's
confidence to do that.
yeah, and also I think it comes with that accumulation of uh experience and success, and yes, they came to him for a look. They wouldn't come to him for minimal.
Right. They
um
would not.
So I have a strange question, and it is the name of the book, An Anatomy of a Decorator, Anatomy of a Decorator. Why decorator, not designer?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, well, he always called himself a decorator. And it was interesting going through his scrapbooks in the mid 70s. He cut out these articles and he wasn't mentioned in them. But that's when the debate between wanting to be called a designer versus a decorator came to the fore, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, that's what he called himself. I think it also, he was very old fashioned in terms of how he viewed the profession. Yeah, how would he answer that? I don't know. There's something about decorating is because he did amazing. He did, like, the decoration, you might say, is the surface level stuff. It's the upholstery, it's the curtains, it's the paint colors, it's the surface on top of everything that's been designed. But that belittles his actual knowledge of being able to change the architecture in a room, raise a door height, add crown moldings, change the shape of a room to make it all work better. But it was really just to reflect his own preference. Like, for example, the first book is Mario Buatta, 50 Years of Interior Decoration.
Yeah.
And that was his choice as well.
Yeah.
But it is like, because I have taught at FIT, New York School of Interior Design, and I was giving a lecture at FIT on Thomas Hope, and who wrote a book, and he uses in the title of the book, like the long title, decoration. And a student told on me. Apparently, I was chastised for using the word decoration. But yet it was sort of quoting Thomas Hope. So it is something that people are very sensitive about. And I understand why you asked that.
Well, I ask it as someone who had 1 year of design school and then worked for a man named Earl Hought Miller in Dallas, who was from Natchez, who was a decorator, but he was legendary in his little arena. And I think my father was probably a decorator, I think, and I have decorated my house and I've had some help, but so, in Alabama, we had this sort of conflagration maybe 15, 20 years ago, when designers who had been to design school and had their degrees and their license would get, up in arms if a decorator called themselves a designer. And so that's one of the reasons I'm asking about this, is that it's just a word, it's not an MD. It's not, we're not saying we can practice, medicine or, so, but I just wondered if that was the gist of Mario. Was he not trained? He was probably not trained to do interior design. He knew scale, he knew proportion, he knew what looked good, but he didn't have a degree.
Didn't, but on the other hand, not many people, well, I mean, Albert Hadley certainly did, right? And all the people who went through the Parsons program.
Yeah.
But he did train in offices, you know, like he
Yes.
works for Elizabeth
Yes.
Draper, who
Yes.
was Dwight Eisenhower's decorator. She called herself a decorator as well. So I, you know, one of the things that you're kind of pinpointing is that is in this, he's existing in this moment of the profession's evolution from where
Mhm.
you do have, you know, the lady decorators, and then it does become much more professionalized, and people are getting schooling, you know, degrees and proper
Right.
training. And he is sort of straddling it. More to that point, Sister Parish would always, you know, if you think about her versus Mario, they did very much the same look. They had a lot in common. Um, Sister Parish was the real deal in terms of being a WASP and growing up the way that she decorated for her
Right.
clients, whereas Mario always fantasized about it and looked up to it.
Kind of a more Ralph Lauren of interior.
Yeah,
You think about it.
exactly. But at the end of the day, at the end of the workday, Mrs. Parrish wants to go home and be with her daughter, or like wants to be with her friends.
Mm-hmm.
Mario is going off to a cocktail party, or, you know, he keeps working. He's going off to a showroom opening or
Yeah.
something along those lines. And there's in that oral biography about Sister, she talks about like, you know, she can't understand why Mario has all these licenses. Like, why does he need to have his name on sheets and, you know, potpourri and
Yeah.
all these crazy, like, she just didn't understand, like, why would that be interesting? And Mario really, now everybody does it. Like, that's the
Yeah.
way that everybody
Right.
wants it. But he was really showing that shift in becoming a personal brand.
Right.
And so I think it's an interesting comparison.
It is an interesting comparison. Thank you for drawing that, because you think about the confidence that Sister Parish had
Mm.
as a WASP, versus Mario and his background. I I love that, you know, and he just kept producing. And you know, I asked earlier about what drove him, what inspired him, and partly it was that, I would imagine, you know, that um maybe a little bit of trying to prove himself.
Yes, absolutely. He did have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, and he did think that he would have been more successful if his name wasn't super Italian. That if he had
Oh,
been, I mean, he said, like, if my name had been Mark Hampton, I would have been more successful. And
who could be more successful than Mario Buatta?
right, it blew my mind. It blew my mind. And it just shows that no matter people we might look up to as having achieved the pinnacle of success, and they're having thoughts like that, you
Yeah,
know.
we're all
Mm,
human.
yeah.
You know, and you think about the irony of an Italian where, you know, the font, the rooted in all the beauty of the Italian sensibility, the Italian of, you know, to be in any way insecure about decorating talent. I mean, oh my gosh.
But
So
it's a real prejudice though, you know, like back when
it
he's growing
was.
up, like I no Irish, no Italian,
Yeah.
no. And he did share you know, when we were sitting down and I was interviewing him for the first book, he talked about the first time he realized that people looked down on Italians, and, you know, what, back growing up in Staten Island. And it was
Yeah.
like, oh, you know, oh, okay. So you know, he did carry that with him.
Yeah. Well, that makes me sad to hear that, but also it probably spurred him to do
Yes.
more,
Yes,
you
it's
know,
for him.
and we're the beneficiaries of that. And you are, well, so I know a little bit about his background in terms of studying in England, some of the great country house. Did he go with Parsons?
Yes, so
Eng-
so as I mentioned, he only had a little bit of college and he dropped out. And then he was taking night classes at Cooper Union, but those weren't really towards a degree, which he sort of misrepresented when he was alive. But I, called the registrar's office and tried to find out more. But he was working at Bealman at that time, and Albert Hadley came in and basically said, you need to go to Europe. You need to do the Parsons Summer School course. And so Mario saved up money. I think it took him a year to save up.
Hey, wait, I got to interrupt. Albert Hadley came in
Like shopping at Bealman.
And just saw, did he know Mario?
He did not know Mario. And I know Mario had, and we have this photograph in the book, Albert had, or Mr. Hadley had done a room for Vogue that was like a summer bedroom on a shoestring. And for some reason, that room just emblazoned itself on Mario's mind. So he was very much aware of Albert Hadley. And so Albert was working for Macmillan at the time. So he was coming in and shopping. And we just don't really have those kind of furniture, those department store furniture floors anymore, sadly. But yeah, and it also just shows, it reflects so much about how Mr. Hadley was such a mentor. And and he did teach at Parsons for many years before he went to Macmillan. So he was naturally professorial, I think, in wanting to mentor people. And so Mario, I'm so glad Mario listened to him, and he saved up the money, and he went to Europe for the very first time in, I think it's 1951 is when he went. And I think it changed his life. So that was really probably the only real proper education he ever got. And other designers who were on that, like most of the people who were on the course were full-time Parsons students, and Mario was a bit older. So they're all like 20 or something. And Mario's like 25, 26, kind of sticking out. He was like, I was told he pulled pranks that didn't really go over well. I was also told that he couldn't always stay where everybody else stayed because it was too expensive. So he wanted to be there. Like, it wasn't easy, you know what I mean? But he really wanted to be there. And then in terms of getting connected to the English country house style, everybody knows this story, but he's working for Keith Irvin, who had actually been John Fowler's assistant before he came over to America. And he's looking through a book of British interiors in Keith's office, and he sees Nancy Lancaster's Yellow Room. And there you have it. And I have to say, like, the Madeleine Castaing book I wrote, the Andre Samuel book, it's because I saw a room they did and I was gobsmacked. And that's where those books all started. So I'm sure you've had that experience of like a book, you see a room in person or in a photograph, and it just, it's like,
it ticks all your boxes.
Yeah. Takes your breath away.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, and that's the power of beauty. I mean, that's a concept that I delve into a lot in conversation with people, is just that life-giving power of a beautiful thing, a beautiful room, a beautiful place. And from what I remember, I have not read your book. I have skimmed it. I will sit down. I don't read a lot of design books, but yours is not just a design book. And so I look forward to poring over it in my spare time, because it's personal. But I know that Mario was so intrigued with the Regency.
Yeah, he did love that period in particular. You're right.
Is there something that you can sort of tease out about that specifically that appeal to him?
Well, the Regency, I think it's a more masculine style. It has a strength to it and a volume to it that earlier neoclassicism doesn't have. It also, of course, has chinoiserie, is, the Brighton Pavilion is, and he was just he like was obsessed with chinoiserie, which I really understood going through his collections. So I think it is that mixture of it's masculine in its form and in its volume, but then it's mixed with this fanciful, whimsical quality.
Which is him. Which
Which
is
was
him.
him.
I
Yeah.
mean, the masculine, but then also the whimsical prankster, um, magical imagination that was part of his personality and his ethos in general, I guess I would say. And I didn't know him like you did, but I picked up on that.
I want to go back to what you were saying about beauty before, because I think it's so easy. Like when people ask me what I do, I often sort of like, oh, I just write these books about, dead decorators or whatever, or and
Don't
like,
ever say just.
well, and Mario would, he was always a jokester, and he's like, we're not curing cancer. This is like, but beauty isn't frivolous. Beauty is life enhancing, having an environment. And that's what he wanted to do for his clients. He wanted to make his clients feel good, look good, live, optimize their life. And so that's not nothing, right?
Yeah, that's something.
Yeah, yeah.
That's really something. And that does not surprise me to hear you articulate that, because though I didn't know him well, I picked up such an underlying kindness in him. I mean, I was nobody. I'm still just, I'm not Martha Stewart. I have a magazine, and it's not huge. It's, anyway, not to
Oh,
self-deprecate,
but we
but
need to talk about we
he
have
made
to talk
me
about your
feel,
magazine. Your magazine, which is named Flower. I mean, it's so connected to what Mario was all about. The
yeah,
garden was his
yeah,
primary inspiration, the
yeah,
color palette, bringing in floral chintz or
yeah,
ceramics, like bringing the outdoors indoors.
yeah,
Even he would talk about how arranging things in a room, you need to have different heights like you do in a border in a garden.
yeah.
So your magazine is really encapsulates it all. It's such a
Well,
celebration.
thank you. Thank you. Well, and that's a great point. What I mean is that I could have been anybody. When I sat down with him that night, I was interested in him and he was interested in me.
Yeah.
And that on that, just that human to human level, where there was no, what can you do for me? Because I couldn't do anything for him. We did do a feature on the Prince of Chintz. Karen Carroll, is still one of our great editors, who was the editor-in-chief of Southern Accents, was my pick to write about him, of course. And she did such a masterful job. And I just fell in love with him. I fell in love with him as a person, as an artist, as a personality. And I regret that I didn't know him more. So when you agreed to this Zoom, I thought, this is the next best thing. This is no, really, this is the next best thing to getting to know him more.
Well, and I'm really glad you brought up how accessible he was, because yours is such a common story that I came across over and over again of somebody in the Midwest sees that they have a nephew that maybe would like interior design, and they write a letter to Mario. They don't know Mario, but they write a letter and they just say, well, could my nephew ever be in touch with you? And the nephew's like in high school. And then the nephew comes to New York with his aunt and uncle. They go out to lunch with Mario. Again, they've never met him before. Mario mentions the New York School of Interior Design, actually writes a letter for him. The nephew goes to the New York School of Interior Design, interns for Mario. I mean, and it's just how if you called him, he would probably answer the phone and talk to you,
Yeah.
and he would be friendly. He wouldn't be like in a rush, and that he had all the time in the world in that respect. is something extraordinarily special about him.
It's a generosity,
Hmm.
a generosity of spirit that we don't see as much, but when we do, we recognize and appreciate it. And you certainly experienced it with him. What was that? I mean, when I read about you, that he mentored you.
He did. Yeah, he absolutely did. And again, I wasn't working for him as a
Right.
designer, and I think in a way because he wasn't like Mr. Hadley. I think that's an interesting comparison to make because Mr. Hadley really did mentor the people who worked for him.
Mm-hmm.
If a project was going to be published, he wanted to make sure that that assistant had their name in the article as well. Mario would never have done that, and if his assistant left, he would not want you to use the sources that you had discovered working for him. He would basically tell the lampshade maker you are forbidden to make
Yeah.
anything for that person who is left. So that's very different.
Yeah.
But because he mentored me in a way of how to think about things. I think because he knew I wasn't a threat in terms of trying to take clients away from him or anything
Right.
like that, that he was very, very open and really shared things in a way that he might not with other people who had worked for him, if that makes sense. And just we went to his workrooms together, and just also, even if he wasn't laying it out for me, the ability to inspect so many of his curtains firsthand and to
Mm-hmm.
see how they're lined, interlined, what kind of fabric he's using for the backing, the trims. When you get to handle so many things that he's put together, you start to kind of learn how would he do something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, that year that we spent almost every single day, all day, talking or him talking, I just absorbed so much. And sometimes I would say something and he's like, you shouldn't talk like that, like don't. He would correct me, and
Like I told you not to say just.
right. And I think
We old people.
yeah.
Oh,
I'm always, there isn't a day that goes by that I'm like, well, what would Mario do? Like,
I love that.
that I'm always thinking, how would he do it? Or how would he, not just like decorating, but like, how would he reply to that? How would he be, what would his advice be? So in a way, I feel like it's almost been unhealthy, the presence he's been in my life for the past, since he was dying. So the past 5 years, this book is sort of my final Valentine in a way of,
Mhm.
so it was the hardest book I've ever done, and
I
I
was
thought,
going to ask you that. What was this book to you?
oh my gosh. I mean,
Valentine. That's
I thought I
beautiful.
could just sit down and like one week, like it's over, and it was agony. And there was so much, there's so many archives to go through because he never threw anything away. So it was also like, oh, I want to make sure I don't miss something. But it was also, when will another book about him be written? I'm sure there will be more, of course, but I want to get it right. I want to get it right for him. I
Yeah.
wanted to reveal more than he would have revealed, but then I also didn't want to betray him. So
Course.
it was such a fine line of like, what do I share and not share? But I wanted to be honest,
Right.
so it was really, really difficult juggling all that.
Well, I bet it was. And with the idea of really portraying him as he was, but not an completely unvarnished, not completely we need um we need a little of a little illusion. We need,
Right.
as people, as consumers, as designers or editors, or we want some of the mystery.
You're right. We
I
do.
I do. I
Yeah.
do. Um, but I do want to ask you, this is a strange question too, but I'm going to ask it. Can you describe his hospitality?
Oh,
I'll tell you why I asked that. I just did a panel at an antique show on the art of hospitality. And it's something as a Southerner that I think about, and I don't just mean throwing a party,
right.
but just, I mean, it's a broader concept. And I think about him in the term I used earlier, generosity, but hospitality. Can you describe for us his hospitality?
So my first reaction was like, this is going to be tough because he was not physically able to invite people into his own residence. So he was not able to entertain at home. But
Right.
he often, for decades and decades, would invite people to dinner in the cabaret, or to a play. He loved Broadway. He loved cabaret singers like Blossom Dearie, of course, Peggy Lee. And so he would often invite, I mean, there were several times where he invited me along with a few other people, to, like, you would go to the play, or you'd see Joan Rivers perform for her God Loves Deliver gig, and then you would go have this great dinner, and he was hosting you, and he was very generous and made you feel great. And so that was a hospitality, I would say.
Sharing his love.
Yeah, sharing his love. Exactly. Yeah, you really,
that he was passionate about.
yeah, exactly. So then that was sort of, when he wasn't designing, that was his favorite thing to do, was to just, and I would think, like, when you're listening to music or you're at a show, you can really let yourself go. You can really be swept away in the moment. And so that was sort of a release for him, I imagine, like letting somebody else entertain him.
Yes. Oh, that makes such sense. Absolutely. And a bit of an escape.
But also, like what you were saying, appreciation for the illusion. I think he really appreciated it in other entertainers, the art of how they entertained. I think it was, he at a very high level would have applauded their technique. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that would be, I would say, his hospitality. And then there would be, he had a huge sweet tooth. And so when we had these meetings at Rizzoli, he would bring, and he was diabetic, but he pretended he wasn't, so that wasn't great. But he would bring, like, he always had to have orange juice. He would bring a big thing of jam, and he loved ice cream. And he's like, well, do you like ice cream? And I said, oh, I really love peanut butter. I love chocolate peanut butter ice cream. And so to one meeting, he brought a chocolate Haagen-Dazs pint, and then like a jar of peanut butter. And it was like that little thing of like how he listened, you know what I mean? Like absorbed in the conversation. I would say that's hospitality in a way.
I would agree. I would agree. And I to this day don't like anything as much as chocolate and peanut butter.
Oh,
I mean, oh my gosh, there's nothing better.
it's a pretty incredible combination.
When I was pregnant, I remember taking Oreo cookies and just dunking them in a jar of Jif.
Oh, that's an idea.
Well, because when you're pregnant, you can eat anything.
Yeah.
Or you think you can. So what a treat for you to have known this giant among men.
It really was. It's changed my life. It's the whole adventure of working with his estate, to working with the auctions, to understand him as a collector. I don't know if I'll have any, I hope I do, but this might be the most fascinating adventure I'll ever go on. Potentially. It was incredible. It was really, really incredible. And I feel so lucky.
I feel so jealous. So I do want to ask this. Did you come away with anything from the auction?
I wasn't allowed to bid at the Sotheby's auction because I was so involved in setting the estimates and everything like
Right. Well, that makes sense, of
that. So
course.
that makes sense. But oh my gosh, I'm going to tell you the whole story. So there's this amazing watercolor of Mario in his bed that the artist Constantine Cacanius did for this New York Times story. And I knew Mario had it. And again, it was sort of like, it was an excavation, going
Of
through
course. I've
everything.
seen pictures. So,
And
yeah.
so it was in his office, and I was with his brother, and we found this drawing because I was so curious to see it in person. And it was the one thing I was going to ask the brother if I could have. And we found it, and the first thing the brother said was, "Oh, this is going to bring a lot of money." So then I knew,
Oh,
like,
no.
so I was like, "Oh, well, I can't, like I can't possibly, I wouldn't dare to ask for it, of course." So it was the last lot in the Sotheby sale. And somebody had asked me if I could have bid on anything, what would I bid on? And I said, well, it would be that. It just encapsulates Mario for me so much. And he loved that bed, and he's just like surrounded by just tons of stuff. And that person bought that piece and gave it to me as a gift. And I'm looking at it right now. I have it right under
Can
my
we see
television.
it? Can we
Oh,
see it?
well, no, because the room, it's like this geriatric ward for cats. So you'll see all this
Okay.
other stuff.
Okay.
But if you Google Mario Buatta, Constantine Cacanius, you can see it.
Okay.
It's anyway, so it's just the fact that this woman
Yes.
was her generosity.
Yes.
I think of her every time I see it, and just
Of
that
course you
people
do.
can be so generous.
Of course you do.
Like how could I possibly be bitter or like have a chip on my shoulder when somebody was so incredible like that? It really inspires me. And then it makes me think of him, like he's sitting here watching TV with me or like Zooming with you.
How encouraging. And he is in some way. But how encouraging that there are people like that in the world.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
It's just
Yes,
really a
absolutely right.
person.
I was sort of hoping that you were going to say that when you said that you couldn't bid, but you loved this, and then somebody asked you what you would have been. That is a person that I would want to be.
Yeah.
Every now and then, if I have on some earrings or something, then somebody, like, I'll take them off and give them to them, just because I don't want anything to be that precious to me that I can't part with it. But I don't want to part with it unless it's to somebody who really loves it.
Yeah, it makes it that much easier in a way. Yes, because
Yes.
they're gonna love it.
And
Yeah.
that's what that woman did for you. And that is so special. Well, all right, I want to ask you one more thing. In parting, you have one word to describe Mario Buatta.
Wow. Oh my God, Margot, can I have 2 words?
Okay, two, but no more. Two, but no more.
Okay. Exuberant. He was larger than life. He had a huge appetite for life, so exuberant, and his rooms were exuberant. And I would also say he was a romantic, and his rooms were romantic, and his whole approach, I mean, he had a romantic view of things. He wanted things to be like a Hollywood movie, like that much more prettier and glamorous and turning out well than actual life sometimes really is. So I think those are sort of those are keys to him, knowing that he was a romantic, but that just this exuberance about him made him larger than life.
Perfect.
Thank you for letting me cheat, Margot.
Of course, I'm all about grace. Now, listen, you are such a wonderful lens through which to see the master. And I just want to thank you for the time, not just today, but the time of your life that you have expended to get to know him so that we can get to know him, so that we can learn and be inspired, a little indulged maybe, and escape into this romantic world of Mario Buatta. So, and what's behind that too. I want to know the person, and you have helped so much with that. So for that, I'm very, very grateful as well. And thank you for your time today.
Oh, Maro, thank you. And thank you for remembering him with me. Like that's what it's all about, is that we don't forget him.
All right. Tell everybody the name of the book and how they can get it.
The book is Mario Buatta, Anatomy of a Decorator, and it's available in fine bookstores anywhere, and of course, Amazon.
And Rizzoli, it's a Rizzoli publication.
It's published by Rizzoli, that's right, with a foreword by his client, Patricia Altschul.
I don't think I noticed that. That makes perfect sense. Who could appreciate him more than her?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And they had such a great friendship and relationship. Yes.
Well, thank you again. And I hope our paths cross. And I hope I get a minute or two to really sit down and pore over the book, not just skim it like I did for today. I appreciate you so much, and till soon.
Thank you, Margot. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.